Good morning and welcome to Mass Memorial Virtual Sunday School. Theme for the quarter, worship, sacrifices, and offering. We're in the summer quarter, Unit 1, the Genesis of Altars and Sacrifices, Sunday, June 8th, 2025. Lesson titled, The Rainbow Promise. Genesis 8, 13 through 22, the 9th chapter, 11 through 13, King James Version. The key verse, I do set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a token of a covenant between me and the earth. Comes from Genesis 9:13, King James Version. The aim for this lesson is to dive deeply into the broader context that calls forth Noah's worship, and to emphasize why Noah felt the need to worship, and to identify an aspect of Noah's worship of God and adapt it for use in our congregation. Our lesson background, the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis deals with God's creation of the world and humanity's history after Adam and Eve sinned and their ultimate separation from God. As humanity grew, so did sin, and so much so that God decided to cleanse the earth with the great flood. The flood was God's judgment of a world corrupt by humanity's sin and rebellion against Him. All of humanity and every living creature had to pay the ultimate price for sin, except for those inside Noah's ark. Noah, the main character in this lesson, his lineage goes back 10 generations from Adam and Eve, so he was like great-great-great-great-grandson. So God chose Noah and his family because of his faithfulness and because of his obedience. And God felt that He chose Noah for this mission because Noah's righteous standing before him. And again, because he was faithful to what God wanted him to do. Our continuation with our background. This lesson kind of signifies the beginning of burnt offering. If you remember, in our last spring quarter, we dealt with burnt offering after the Jews were brought out of captivity. They made burnt offerings, and which was the thankfulness they had toward God. So we see that Noah had a new charge of building a new life upon a sin-cleansed earth. Noah's initial response to God's request was to build an altar and lead his family to praise and worship God for bringing them through the great flood. Because of Noah's faith and relationship with God, he realized the task was impossible without making sure God was pleased and that he totally depended on him. And this is a lesson for us today. Before we undertake a task, we really need to pray over it, think about it, and make sure that's what God wants us to do. The other important thing in our lesson is the ark. Noah's ark, the vessel that God instructed Noah to build to preserve Noah and his family during the great flood. It took more than 100 years to build the ark. God gave instructions for building the ark, and according to biblical measurements of that time, it was believed to be 300 cubits, which is 450 feet, 50 cubits, 75 feet, and 30 feet high. And a cubit was believed to be between 1.5 to 2 feet. We don't know exactly how they measured cubic in that time, but we'll get to a discussion of this a little bit more as we go into our scriptures. The rainbow promise, one of the most important things in this lesson, is that the covenant was a promise that Noah or all flesh shall never be cut off anymore by the waters of the flood, and no flood will ever destroy the earth. And he confirmed his promise by putting a rainbow in the sky. So when we see a rainbow, that's a representation of God's covenant that the earth will never be destroyed again by water. And as we get into our scriptures, Genesis, a new beginning, Genesis 8, 13 through 20, King James Version. One one thing I'm going to do before I get into the scriptures, I'm going to cover a little bit of the verses that occurred before we get to Genesis 8 and 13. Some interesting facts about the flood. It lasted 40 days. Now, we don't think of 40 days as being long, but if it's raining 40 days and you're getting 10 or 15 inches of rain, that's a lot of rain. So if you just think about what happens in our own location when we get 2 inches of rain. Streets flood, yards flood. So this was 40 days of rain. And the waters on the earth lasted 150 days before it actually dried up. And at a point when Noah thought the earth might have been dry, he opened a window and sent out a dove one time, sent out a raven the next time to see if the waters had dried up. And I think it was the raven that brought back the green peace sign, green sign that there was life. But one interesting thing, Noah did not depart the ark until he was instructed to do so by God. And so one thing about Noah was old when he did this. He lived 350 years after the flood. Now, one thing we don't know what those calendar years were like. If we say they were like our calendar years, we would say it's impossible for somebody to live that long. But we don't know what that time reference is. And we see that a lot in the Old Testament, where they'll live 100 years or 80 years, but we don't know what that calendar was based on. So let's get into our scriptures, a new beginning. Genesis 8 and 13. And it came to pass in the 601st year, in the first month, the first day of the month, the waters were dried up from off the earth. And Noah removed the covering of the ark, and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. Genesis 13:14. And in the second month, on the 7th and 20th day of the month, was the earth dry. Genesis 13:15. And God spake to Noah. And we'll get into those verses later. But after the flood, if we go back and look at our 13 through 15. This was just saying that after the flood, Noah was able to look out and see that the ground was dry. Now, it took 150 days. That's in our time, that would be 30 days in a month. That would be 5 to 6 months. And so we really don't know if it was that long, because it wasn't sunshine all those days. But according to the Old Testament, it took 150 days for it to be completely dry. And so this is just telling us how long it lasted, when it came about, and when Noah recognized that the earth was dry. And then moving on to verses 16 and 17, verse Genesis 13:16, go forth of the ark, thou and thy wife, and thy sons wives with thee. Genesis 13:17, bring forth with thee every living thing that is with thee, of all flesh, both of fowl and of cattle, and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, that they may breed abundantly in the earth, and be fruitful and multiply upon the earth. Now, after the flood was over, Noah again was faithful and obedient to when God gave him the instructions to leave the ark. Noah had already observed that the earth's surface was dry, but he waited until it was completely dry, and he didn't move to leave the ark until God had instructed him, and moving his family and the animals that were on the ark. In other words, Noah could have, as we call it, jumped the gun and decided, well, it's dry, we're gonna go out anyway. But Noah didn't do that. He waited till God gave him instructions on what to do. And so God told him, you take your family out first, then all the animals that I have asked you to keep, you take them out, And what they are supposed to do is to breed and repopulate the earth. This story in Genesis is an interesting story. This story, to believe, has to be based on faith. Because if you try to explain this in our day and age, it probably would sound a little strange. But this is God's handiwork. And we know with God, anything can occur and all things are possible. So after God instructed Noah how to leave the ark and when to leave the ark, the next thing he did is this, our other section is called A New Beginning. And I'm going to read Genesis 13:18. And Noah went forth, and his sons and his wife, and his sons' wives with them. Genesis 13:19. Every beast, every creeping thing, and every fowl, and whatsoever creepeth upon the earth after their kinds, went forth out of the ark. Genesis 13:20. And Noah built an ark unto the Lord, and took every cleansed beast and every cleansed fowl, and offered burnt offering on the altar. This gets into the instruction that God had given Noah for leaving the ark. He took his sons out. He took the beast out. And one important thing, after these animals were out, took them out to repopulate the earth, in verse 13 and 20, it says, Noah built an altar unto the Lord. And so what he did, he set the altar up for burnt offering. And what he wanted to show his gratitude to God for protecting him and bringing him through the great flood. Noah also realized that a new beginning was impossible without making sure that God was pleased. And so Noah was totally dependent on God. So he wanted to make sure before he started doing any work that God was pleased with what he was about to do. And if you remember, when the children of Israel came out of captivity, they built an altar to God for protecting them, for bringing them out of captivity. And also when they came out of the wilderness, they also built an altar to thank God. So if you look at this lesson and wonder how it applies today, we look at this lesson as being one of obedience and gratitude. Obedience in terms of doing what God wants you to do. And all the time, we don't know the reason for things. And we're hesitant to do something that we don't know what the future holds. If God tell you to pack up and go to New York, you gonna go, but you probably have some questions. Now, why do I need to do this? And so we need to just depend on God when these decisions come. Even when we get ready to make a decision to do something, we need to get on our knees and say, well, Lord, is this the right thing? And you'd be amazed at the guidance that you can get. And so that's what Noah did. Noah had lived through the flood. The animals had survived the flood. And so the first thing he did when he hit land was to build an altar and thank God for what he had done. The other two verses in our lesson is Genesis. It's called the New Covenant. Genesis 8:21. And the Lord smelled a sweet savor. And the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground anymore for man's sake. For the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more everything living as I have done. Genesis 22. While the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall cease. Now, what actually in verse 22, this verse is verse 21. This verse is leading up to what God had promised Noah. And when it says, and the Lord smelled a sweet savor, It kind of says he was pleased with what he had allowed to happen. And this is a figure of speech, showing appreciation. God had cleansed the earth. So, when something is clean, it smells clean, and we see it as clean. And oftentimes, at least in the South, if it rains and the rain falls on the dust, there's a particular smell. It's a fresh smell of the earth. So in this verse, God was just saying, I have cleansed the earth of sin, and we're starting new, which is amazing. So he's saying we're starting new. And what he also said in verse 21, he says he will no longer, first of all, after he appreciated what he had done, he began to think about man's nature. And God made man, so he knew what man was about. And he said, man is evil from his youth, which means that because he was from a sin-based relationship in Adam and Eve, who had predominantly sinned and brought sin into the world. So God said that because of man's nature, he will continue to do things that are against mankind, against humanity. He said, man has a nature and a propensity towards sin, which means he will lean towards sin. That is man's nature. So what God said, he said, because of this, I will not ever again smite the earth or cleanse the earth through water by using the flood and the water. And so this is a big promise. And so he confirmed that. And as we see a rainbow, we should be mindful that this is God's doing. This is God's reminding us that not again, no flood would ever occur. Because sometimes, there's areas that flood drastically. In the South, they have mudslides, flood. But God said that's not the way that the earth will be cleansed the next time. And so in verse 21, he said, nature will never be interrupted. Everything will, from here on out, seed time and harvest, hot and cold, summer and winter, will remain the same. It will not be destroyed again by the flood. So as we go on down and continue with a new covenant, Genesis 9:11, and I will establish my covenant with you. Neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of the flood. Neither shall there be any more flood to destroy the earth. Genesis 9:12, and God said, this is the token of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. That means for future generations. Genesis 9:13, I do set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a token of a covenant between me and the earth. And this was the ultimate covenant that God made, not just with Noah, but for every living thing, for every generation to come, which means thousands and thousands of generations. No matter how tough it gets, the earth will not be destroyed by water, which is nice for us to know, but then there may be something worse. I think by fire is the ultimate destruction that's coming next. But God told Noah, I'm gonna seal my covenant. I'm gonna seal this by putting a rainbow in the sky so that you can always know that there will be no more floods. There'll be, and he didn't just promise this to Noah. He promised this to even the creeping things, the animals, and every living creature from Noah's generation even up to our present generation. Perpetual generation meaning future generation. And so God was just solidifying his covenant. And one thing about Noah trusted God, and he knew that God would keep his promise. But God kind of did something special for Noah when he put the rainbow in the sky. Noah was faithful. Noah did everything that God asked him to do. But he just said, I'm going to show you. I'm going to seal this covenant with this rainbow. So this is our lesson for this Sunday. But when we think of this lesson, and we've heard this story over and over and over again from childhood, we need to think about how it relates to us today. So, as I said, it's one that we've heard numerous times, and we really need to take time to think about how relevant it is. And this is one that our lesson that should increase our faith and obedience to God for what He has done for us every day, and even in those dire times that we need Him most. Because of Noah's faith and obedience, his family was saved. And so, like I said, this is a lesson in faith and obedience, and seeing that God keeps His promises. So even if we don't see a rainbow in the sky, we still need to get on our knees and be thankful for what God is doing for us every day. Because when we wake up, that's already a gift from God that He has given to us. The other important point in this lesson is that Noah did not question God when God gave him the directive for building the ark. Noah was obedient even though he had no idea what the future held. Now, this is something that we run into a lot. Some people, they don't want to take a new job because they don't know what the future holds. Instead of saying, well, Lord, I want to take it on faith and I know that you will provide. But instead, we want to question, well, why do I have to move? Or why this or why that? But Noah didn't do that. He followed God's orders. And this was a tall task back in the day. And like I said, we don't know the exact measurements. We can only go by what the Bible says in cubics. But how they measured cubics could have been different from what we know of in today's time. But anyway, what he did it anyway. He built the ark anyway. And remember, he was ridiculed for building something like that. It's like people see you building, and they say, why are you building something? That's stupid. Or, trying to downplay what you're doing. But Noah had his orders directly from God. So he proceeded. And it took 100 years. So you can imagine all the time that, it's like telling somebody, well, the flood is coming. You need to get ready. And it taken so long that they took him for granted. But Noah proceeded. He kept collecting the animals. He kept building the ark. And he knew when it was time to close the doors. And that's exactly what he did. So other practical applications is that for us, we need to respond to God's call with faith and obedience. And after the flood, we said Noah appreciated what God had done by building an altar. And this reminds us that we should make a habit of being grateful to God for each and every day. And so it seems like we're so busy, we don't take the time always to do what we're going to do. But just even a small whisper of thank you goes a long way when it's from your heart. And we know that finally, the final promise to Noah was that no more floods. And this is an indication that if God tell you He's going to do something, He does it. He keeps His promise. It's usually us that back out on the end of the bargain. And we know God made several covenants throughout the Old Testament. He always kept His promise. He never reneged. We've gotten to the point now in this sinful world that a promise means nothing. A promise is something you break, not something you keep anymore. But here, God sent Noah a powerful reminder that I am going to keep my promise to you and mankind and all the creatures of the earth. So I hope that you have gotten something from this lesson, and that you will continue to join us for our virtual lesson. We're going to be in the book of Genesis for a while, but it's one of the most interesting books because it does deal with humanity. And the different things that happened since Adam and Eve. And so, as you follow us, we hope that you will continue to enjoy our presentation. Thank you.